A pleasure to meet all at last, and welcome back to Honest J Nowak once again. So, I don't know what else to say here at this very point, but I'd say it's time that we try ourselves something different. Have myself a buzz cut for the summer, but I am in fact going to do something else for HJN. You probably know by now, I'm a huge rock and roll connoisseur. There's tons of different bands out there that exist, a lot of which are more obscure than others. But I feel like by this point, it's safe to say that many of them have been pretty much untouched for the past several decades. And in all honesties, it's kind of lonely and depressing. So at this very point, I'm going to declare today a starting point for a new series. Basically, this is number 2106 for the series. And that's a lot of episodes since the very first one that I ever made almost 4 years ago. But we're going to go on ahead and talk about as many rock bands as possible. This is Bandtastic. So, with all the rock bands that I could possibly name off the top of my head, there's tons of them that I've listened to over the years. Plain White T's, All American Rejects, Dinosaur Jr., Death Cab for Cutie, Weezer, Arctic Monkeys, Bush, Smashing Pumpkins, and Amberlins, and Creosoul, and tons of others here and there. So many that I've listened to over the years, as a kid and especially today, with the discovery of so much more that the world of rock and roll has had to offer since the 1950s. And the fact it's still surviving today, quite well, as a matter of fact, really says something. That a genre is just never meant to die once it's around. Though, the unfortunate side of that is that it's not always true. Disco only went so far until the plug was pulled on that in favor of synth pop and other such genres in the 1980s. And of course we know that a lot of things have happened in a very good way for the music industry. But you know what though? For 2106, I might as well just get started with a great band that I've had, or I should probably say we've had, since 1992. Weezer. The band that consists of the likes of Rivers Cuomo, Patrick Wilson, Matt Sharp, and a few other members. Currently, there have been multiple members within the band's ranks since '92, and after 31 years, up until this very point, with all the albums that they've made since 1994, and released through Geffen Records, it's quite possibly one of the greatest things to have ever happened in the rock and roll industry. And these guys have definitely hammered it down really hard, becoming a massive commercial success in the process. Starting off with just 2 albums in the 1990s. Weezer, parenthetically the Blue Album, that's technically the official name for it, which acts as a self-titled album, which is common with most rock bands. But the fact is, the Blue Album would actually become a starting point for a little tradition of theirs, where they would release multiple self-titled albums, but have them parenthetically ranged by colors. More on that later. Because the other album they released in the 90s was Pinkerton. This one, as opposed to the Blue Album that they released 2 years earlier, did not do so well. And this was quite a big turnaround for Weezer, going from a massive commercial success in '94, 2 years later, to practically flopping pretty hard. To make matters worse, Matt Sharp, the founding bassist of the band, would declare a temporary leave, moving back to his home in Oregon for a while, and this would leave the band pretty much vacant with a bassist in need. But they couldn't find one, so unfortunately they had to declare hiatus in 1997. And it wasn't until 2000, believe it or not, that Sharp would eventually make his way back and allow the band to continue from where they left off, with Pinkerton flopping and all that. Desperately needing more money, they went on ahead and created another self-titled album known as Weezer Green Album in 2001. Quite possibly one of the greatest follow-ups to a self-titled album. The fact is, this is one of the only leading examples in the rock and roll industry where a self-titled album is followed by a self-titled album. And in contrast to the Blue Album, the Green Album is one that I've had probably some of the most fond memories of as a young child. Considering I was about 2.5 years old by the time this album came out, and oh my goodness, Hash Pipe and Island in the Sun, as well as Glorious Day. All three of those songs really got stuck in my head as a kid, and I could never forget those impressive riffs, percussive beats, and interesting lyrics, which I never understood a thing about at the time. But many years later, of course, I would eventually come to terms with what it all means. So the Green Album definitely was quite a huge hit in my life. It played on the radio, in the car, a lot of times. It's played in various public places I've gone to, and lots of other things would take place. But then they would follow up on this with other albums, like in 2005 with Make Believe, and then after another 3 years would come along yet another self-titled album, the Red Album. First there's Blue, then there's Green, then there's Red. I almost wonder why there was never a Yellow Album. Yeah. Unfortunate as it sounds, there is no Yellow Album. That would have made perfect sense to start off with all three primary colors, but instead we get a hybrid color following the blue, and then we get to the red. But you know what though? It's okay. The massive success pretty much distracts the ideology that's set in motion, whether it comes to terms with a color palette that would make more sense or otherwise. Because the following year, in 2009, 17 years after the band was originally founded, and when the fact that Rivers Cuomo was 39 going on 40, what did we get after this? Raditude. Oh my gosh. Like, I can't even begin to describe how amazing this album was. For 2009, or for anything in general, oh my goodness. Starting right off the bat really hard with If You're Wondering If I Want You To, then followed along by even more incredible rhythms and guitar riffs. I'm Your Daddy, Can't Stop Partying, which is one of their only instances to include a hip-hop artist like Lil Wayne. One of the only instances. Because they're definitely not Linkin Park, that's for sure. But every other song in that album was just unbelievable. Tripping Down the Freeway, In the Mall, I Don't Want to Let You Go. I could never possibly put anything into words to describe the sheer awesomeness of this. It's the perfect Weezer album. Nothing could possibly compare. Yet, what did we get afterwards? We got ourselves a not too decent album follow-up known as Hurley in 2010. And yeah, not much more to input on that. Then in 2014 we got ourselves a so-called follow-up, or could I possibly say, apology letter from Weezer. Concerning the fact that the past 6 albums at the time were not necessarily all the way up front in terms of both commercial value as well as consumer tastes, Everything Will Be Alright in the End was their 2014 album, but it also serves as some kind of apology letter in the form of an entire album worth of songs to mess with. So that's just pretty much what it's all about there. A huge apology. 2015, we got ourselves another self-titled album, the White Album. And then after all that, 2017. Possibly the greatest, well, commercial-wise, since the Blue Album. Yes, it took a long time for them to have at least one single pop up on the charts as high as any of their singles from the past 20 years. Yeah. But I'm glad they got to that point, because Pacific Daydream, their 2017 release, was also one of the best that I recall at the time. But by then, I was already fully grown up, so don't have much more to say on that part. As the years went on though, more albums came out, and more fans started to clamor around, wanting to know exactly what could they possibly accomplish. There were two more self-titled albums, the Black Album and the Teal Album, which, believe it or not, is little more than a collection of covers based on various songs like Billie Jean, Africa, and Take On Me. So, just to know the fact that Weezer made an entire album filled with nothing but covers of popular songs, that's incredible if you ask me. I could never quite see that many other artists out there that'd be willing to cover songs in such an indecisible way. Well, maybe Alien Ant Farm ripping off Michael Jackson, but that's about it. But otherwise, other albums would come along as well. Van Weezer, OK Human, which is probably their most recent hit that we got. Although Weezer somewhat has plans for the future. They even made an appearance in the soundtrack album to Frozen 2. That's quite a way to go. But then again, it's quite similar to the fact that All American Rejects appeared in another Disney movie, Meet the Robinsons. And we also can't forget the fact we've had similar usages of rock bands within soundtrack albums and movies as well. That just goes to show, sometimes bands can get so big that movie producers will want to call them up and ask them to create an original song for their soundtrack album. The way I see it, I sure hope it continues going in such an amazing way. For Weezer, for the guys running it, even though they are well into their 50s by this point. That's quite a long time to be alive. More importantly, we don't know that many people who'd be willing to have music well into their middle ages. And why is that? Because the body can only do so much. After all, your vocal cords, they can dissipate, shatter like glass if you're not careful. But I can sure tell you right now, I really want Weezer to be big. Again, just like how they were back then. If they could enlighten my 2-year-old self in the year 2001, one of the worst times that we've ever experienced in history, then I'm more than certain that they can make it happen. They already made 3 of the greatest albums I've possibly ever heard in the history of rock and roll. And that's not an exaggeration. And I've heard tons of other examples of rock and roll albums, many which have colorful artwork, amazing lyrics, and impressive rhythms and beats, originally orchestrated by the many hardworking people, not just the bands themselves, but the record producers, directors, writers, etc. It takes a lot just to make one song for one band. A lot of money at times, and a lot of attention to detail. And I can certainly tell you that throughout the rest of this whole entire series that I plan on doing when it comes to talking about rock bands, it's going to be the same exact approach. Lots of attention to detail, lots of craftsmanship, and, of course, you can't have a song without the money involved. Otherwise, it may never truly happen. And I guess that pretty much covers everything you need to know about the band itself and about its overall history. These guys are amazing, period. But now, that pretty much covers that. I feel like that there's going to be a lot of other details you're going to want to hear about other bands, and so that's exactly what I plan on doing for the next 5 or 6 weeks. And so, at this point, if you want to see more, go down on my channel to make sure that you like, subscribe, comment, follow me on social media, and stay on the Hollywood side.